This weekend, the latest Pixar film, Lightyear, opened in theaters, so now it's time to rank all 26 Pixar movies from the worst to the best. Coming in at last place at number 26 is Turning Red, a movie that's way too adult for its target audience and is also way too frenetic and annoying. It's too adult for kids and too childish for adults. The main character is extremely annoying, the film has a lot of messages about rebelling against your parents, which are portrayed in a positive light, and the movie is, frankly, just a ripoff of Teen Wolf. The movie overall, extremely mature subject matter aside, just feels very lazy. Number 25, A Bug's Life, an incredibly mean-spirited, ugly-looking film. For a film with the word life in the title, it's pretty lifeless. Considering this was Pixar's immediate follow-up to Toy Story, it should have been a lot more clever and creative, but instead they chose a very safe route by doing the Three Amigos with bugs. The film was cynical, it doesn't have much Pixar charm. Number 24, WALL-E, an incredibly boring movie that would have worked better as a short film. The love story between two robots is very cute, but when the film runs out of ways to do that story, it turns the second half into a direct ripoff of 2001: A Space Odyssey. The first half moves incredibly slowly and feels more like Pixar wanted to show off their latest technological achievements rather than make a compelling story. I know there are some people that absolutely adore this movie, but I'm just never able to get into it. I can appreciate the filmmaking aspect of it, but from an entertainment perspective, it doesn't deliver. Number 23, Cars 2, a movie that, while it has its entertaining moments, is also a mess. The racing aspect of the first film is given a back seat as the film instead decides to make Mater the main character, and the film becomes James Bond with cars. It's also way too violent for its G rating, as there's gun violence in a scene where a spy car is tortured to death. Considering the main target audience is the 5-year-olds who beg their parents for the toys, that feels incredibly out of place. It feels less like a true Cars sequel and more a feature-length version of the Mater shorts, where he tells the story of various occupations and adventures he supposedly had. I don't hate this movie as much as everyone else, but it's still not good. Number 22, Cars, a movie that, by Pixar standards up to this point, feels very safe. This was their follow-up to Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., and The Incredibles, so it feels like a huge step down. There's nothing about it that's particularly great or that stands out, but there's also nothing about it that's particularly awful either. It just doesn't have the Pixar creativity we've come to expect. Number 21, Brave, a movie that doesn't particularly stand out on its own, instead choosing to borrow plot elements heavily from Mulan, and especially Brother Bear. The movie isn't that interesting, and it just feels like Pixar put the bare minimum of effort into it. Number 20, The Good Dinosaur, a movie that was destroyed from any potential it may have had due to the directors and writers changing several times throughout the creative process. The premise of the original film was supposed to be wildly different, with humans and dinosaurs coexisting and the humans domesticating the dinosaurs. It was supposed to star Neil Patrick Harris, among others, and it was scheduled to come out right after Monsters University. But last-minute director and writer changes over creative differences caused it to be far less different and far less interesting of a movie. The animation is gorgeous, but the story and characters are weak. I blame this movie's problems on being in development for too long, and the studio releasing it so they didn't need to spend any more money on it. What we get is a perfectly safe film that's one of the more forgettable entries in Pixar's library. Number 19, Luca, another movie that feels perfectly safe and familiar by Pixar standards. The message is overdone, and the film doesn't present its message in a fresh or unique way. The whole movie revolves around trying to win a bike, so there's also not a lot of stakes to the plot. The film did a great job in the animation department by giving different character designs for a Pixar film and really transporting the audience to Italy, but story and character-wise, it isn't Pixar's strongest material. Number 18, Finding Dory. How fitting that a movie about a main character who constantly forgets everything is itself very forgettable. Seriously, every time I watch this movie, it's a new experience because I always forget most of it. The plot and characters aren't that memorable, and it doesn't have nearly as much heart as the original. It's, again, a very safe sequel that does the bare minimum of its job. Number 17, Incredibles 2, the most frustrating and disappointing movie on this list because it took almost 15 years to come out, and the story doesn't reflect that. Instead of expanding on the ideas of the first film and having the main characters fight crime as a family, that all takes a back seat, so it can essentially be an Elastigirl spin-off movie. If the film were called Elastigirl and not Incredibles 2, I'd be less critical, but this movie just feels so direct to video. Number 16, Onward, a movie that, given its premise, should have been more creative than it was. Chris Pratt and Tom Holland play elf brothers who live in an anachronistic society, and you could have a lot of fun with this, but all the film's jokes are too similar to Shrek, and the movie's main story just isn't that interesting. It's a road trip movie, so as a consequence it moves too quickly from location to location, feels very repetitive, and doesn't go as far as it's set up as it should have. Number 15, Lightyear, a movie where every character is underdeveloped, not giving you enough information to care about them, and the way the plot and characters are structured feels like instead of working on the film with a finished script, they instead used an outline of ideas they intended to flesh out later, but ran out of time before they could do so. The movie doesn't live up to its full potential, doesn't elaborate on the most interesting ideas, and is just very safe and somewhat rushed. Number 14, Cars 3. I know saying this is the best of the Cars movies isn't saying much, and while in some ways it does feel like a course correction, no pun intended, of Cars 2, it serves more as a loving tribute film to the late Paul Newman. On top of that, while the other Cars movies were a bit more childish, this definitely has Pixar maturity with themes of getting older and making way for the next generation. While I'm not a fan of the way the film ends, enough of it actually feels like they really believed in what they were making, so it's watchable enough for me. Number 13, Monsters University. A somewhat unnecessary prequel to Monsters, Inc., but it's still pretty fun. The new characters are all fun to spend time with, and the story, while not nearly as strong as the first one, is still enjoyable. However, this movie just feels like a pilot episode of the Monsters, Inc. Disney Plus show. Number 12, Toy Story. The classic movie about two toys competing to be their owner's favorite who get stolen and need to get back home. Simple enough setup with likable characters and a movie that changed the animation medium as we know it. While it's perhaps not as strong as some of Pixar's other entries, while it's perhaps not as ambitious, for what it is, it's good enough. Number 11, Toy Story 4. A nice way to close out Woody's story. The new characters in the film are some of the funniest of the whole franchise. The movie still manages to have a lot of complex ideas and heart, and is a nice return to the world of Toy Story. Number 10, Toy Story 2, a rare sequel better than the original. The film deals with themes of growing up, abandonment, expands on the ideas of the original, and has just as much, if not more, heart. Number 9, Toy Story 3, a fantastic way to close out the story of Andy and his toys. The film's second half goes in a wildly unexpected direction, becoming an homage to prison movies, and is perhaps the darkest of all the Toy Stories, and still manages to end the film on a delightfully bittersweet note. Number 8, Finding Nemo, a movie definitely made more for the parents in the audience, though kids can still enjoy it. The film has messages about letting your kids grow up, making mistakes, trusting them, and being a good parent. And for the kids, it has bright colors and quirky characters. Everyone can get something out of this movie, and will definitely get something different out of it, depending on their stage of life. Number 7, Inside Out, a movie that, quite literally, has a lot of emotion. Every character in this movie is perfectly cast. Amy Poehler is joy, Phyllis Smith is sadness, Louis Black is anger, as well as others. The film presents complex ideas about abstract thought, emotion, imagination, and other ideas in a way that kids can understand. What holds it back is it does feel a bit inconsistent and somewhat familiar. The main character's parents' emotions are all presented as the same gender. All female emotions for the mom, all male emotions for the dad. But the main character's emotions are both, which doesn't make sense. And certain ideas like dreams being movies have already been done in films like Osmosis Jones, but it's still a very well thought out movie that tugs at the heartstrings. Number 6, Monsters, Inc., a wildly creative and charming movie. The world of the film is fun to spend time in, the main characters are all very likable, the villains are intimidating, and the movie is very sweet. Number 5, Ratatouille, an absolutely out-of-the-box idea about a rat who wants to be a chef. The film does a fantastic job of transporting the viewers to Paris. The messages of the film are all very inspiring, and you can tell there was a lot of passion put into it. Number 4, Up, a highly creative movie with one of the best and most emotional opening 15 minutes of a Pixar movie. The film has creative characters, an incredibly original premise, and a lot of that trademark Pixar heart. Number 3, Coco, a vibrant and emotional film with a well-done story and arguably the most evil villain of any Pixar movie. The culture of the film is well explored, the story is fantastic, though in some ways slightly contrived, and is a film that everyone, regardless of their culture, can resonate with. Number 2, The Incredibles, a fantastic throwback to the golden age of comics, but with 21st century filmmaking techniques. The characters are all memorable, the story has something everyone can relate to, as a fantastic villain, in some ways is one of Pixar's most mature films, and for 16 years was my favorite Pixar movie. But then my number 1 pick came out and dethroned it. And that number 1 pick is Soul. If Coco explored the ideas of what happens after you die, this movie explores ideas of what happens before you're born. The world of souls who have yet to be born is fun to explore. The film has a message about finding your purpose in life that everyone can relate to. The rules of the film are interesting, it has a lot of heart, it has a lot of emotion, and it comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share your ranking of the Pixar movies, and I will see you next time.